as a country to act on these.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous, and for this episode we turn our focus to a highly secretive US military campaign, Operation Absolute Resolve. It was quietly executed, rapidly concluded, and its impact is now rippling across the region. Let's break it down. What was Operation Absolute Resolve and how was it conducted? Operation Absolute Resolve was a joint US military and counter-narcotics operation conducted across international waters and coastal zones near Venezuela. The official objective: disrupt transnational drug trafficking networks linked to arms groups and state-aligned actors. The operation was led by US Southern Command with support from the Navy, Air Force, DEA and regional partners. Phase 1 focused on intelligence dominance. US forces used satellite surveillance, signals intelligence and maritime patrol aircraft to track high-value drug vessels. Once targets were confirmed, Phase 2 began: precision interdiction. How were these strikes carried out? US officials say the operation involved a series of coordinated strikes and boardings executed over multiple days with precise timing and planning. The operation was initially scheduled for mid-December 2025, but the final execution was delayed to ensure intelligence was verified and all assets were in position. In the weeks leading up to the strikes, the US Navy and Special Forces conducted extensive practice drills. Extraction teams rehearsed scenarios on simulated drug vessels, practicing boarding procedures, hostile encounter responses and rapid detention of suspected traffickers. The final plan required naval destroyers and Coast Guard cutters to approach target vessels from multiple directions, closing in at high speeds to cut off escape routes. Once in range, fast-moving narco subs, speedboats and armed force vessels were identified using satellite and signal intelligence. Each move was synchronized to minimize risks, prevent the attackers from dumping cargo or escaping, and ensure the extraction of suspected individuals with maximum efficiency. The planned execution window lasted 72 hours, with strikes and boardings timed to coincide with nightfall and low visibility, reducing the chance of resistance and ensuring surprise. According to US defense and law enforcement sources, the United States struck or interdicted 9 drug trafficking vessels during Operation Absolute Resolve. Of those, 6 were disabled by warning, fire and forced boardings. 3 were destroyed after hostile fire was reported. So why was this operation different? Unlike previous counter-narcotics missions, Operation Absolute Resolve was faster, more lethal and more politically charged. US officials allege the drug networks targeted were directly connected to senior figures within Venezuela's power structure and regional armed groups. This blurred line between law enforcement and military action. But what were the ramifications? First, security. The operation has severely disrupted established drug routes through the Caribbean, but experts warn drug trafficking networks are adaptive and may shift towards Central America or the Pacific. Second, politics. The strikes have heightened tensions between Washington and Caracas. Critics say the operation sets a precedent for using military force under counter-narcotics justification. Supporters argue it was necessary to break state-protected criminal networks. Third, power dynamics. Inside Venezuela, with key figures removed or isolated and financial pipelines disrupted, a power vacuum is emerging. Security analysts say control is likely to shift temporarily to a combination of senior military commanders, intelligence officials and civilian political allies seeking to stabilize the system. Now, who is expected to take over? US and regional sources indicate 3 possible scenarios: a military-led transition authority claiming to restore order, an internal political succession backed by security elites, or a fragmented power structure with regional strongmen competing for control. None of these options guarantee stability. In the bigger picture, Operation Absolute Resolve marks a shift. The United States is signaling that narcotics trafficking linked to state actors will be treated as a direct security threat, not just a criminal issue. What happens next depends on how regional powers respond and whether this operation deters or destabilizes further. One thing is clear: Absolute Resolve was not just an operation, it was a message. Joining us now is Dr. Asta Chadha, an Associate Professor of International Relations at Ritsumeikan University. She joins us live from Kyoto. Thank you very much for joining us, as always. It's a pleasure. Let's get straight into this. What are the operational and logistical challenges of coordinating such an attack as we did yesterday?
Absolutely. I mean, looking at this Absolute Resolve operation, looks like it included vast amounts of, intelligence gathering. They coordinated their naval assets. They coordinated their Air Force stealth fighters. We are hearing that F-22s and F-35s were involved in this. They engaged their Army Special Forces because remember that they wanted to make sure this is a to-the-second precision operation. And it needed to be wrapped up fast enough. It needed to be wrapped up to give enough time for the extraction that they wanted to make, but also to be able to avoid suppressive fire or any self-defense engagements from within Venezuela. So US not only had to, specifically with regard to this extraction that happened yesterday, US just didn't have to disable Venezuela's own integrated air defense systems, which is what they were targeting initially, but they also had to make sure that the capital city, Caracas's electrical grid would be cut off simultaneously, because they were trying to have this path clear for extraction aircrafts ready. And from what we are hearing regarding the environmental constraints in Venezuela is that probably this operation was planned or should have happened some time ago, but due to a various amount of factors, including weather conditions, including the fact that they needed special aviators who could navigate the mountainous terrain in absolute near total darkness, and you were mentioning earlier they had to maintain the element of surprise, and all of this coordination requires immense amount of planning, immense amount of resolve, immense amount of training. And looks like United States did not only have an absolute resolve in that sense, but they also had enough capabilities, because it looks like logistically there was no hurdle. Usually in fast operations like these, the biggest challenge is getting out and not just getting in. But they were able to extract the leader, Maduro, and his wife, Cecilia Flores, quite fast. They were able to ensure that there was no suppressive fire, there were no casualties on the US side. They were able to navigate the self-defense engagements, if at all there were any, and they were able to do a successful operation, which the information they're only sharing now. So, looks like even though it was a very short mission, it had a very short, very small window, but immense amount of planning, immense amount of coordination was going on in the backdrop. And, third, I must mention here that this was, for US, also a very high stakes operation. There's a reason why a lot of other US administrations, the previous ones, had not engaged with Venezuela in the past in any such operations, because the risks were too high. This is not only about narco trafficking, this is also about destabilizing the entire region. This is about opening the Pandora's box of immense amount of immigration related issues, which anyway are a matter of, or a subject of discussion now. So US being able to carry out these strikes not only demonstrated the fact that they were very much on the same page with all their defense forces, with all their planning, with all their intelligence gathering, that this needed to be conducted, but also the fact that they felt probably this was something that they needed in order to, in their strategic thinking, in order to stabilize the region further and make sure that narco traffickers at least would feel deterred with capable United States forces, with the fact that deterrence force in the US was quite capable, and they demonstrated it.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, power in Venezuela and who's going to lead the country now seems uncertain. Of course, Donald Trump has said that the United States is going to govern Venezuela on a temporary basis. But how might the power vacuum in Venezuela affect regional security and the US interests following this operation?
I mean, this power vacuum is something that I don't see a lot of information coming out of the US very clearly regarding, because seems like there is a little bit of a chaos on this regard. So the earlier Nobel Peace Prize winner Machado, who was supposed to probably be a candidate, the US does not seem to show a lot of confidence in that candidate. And the vice president who has of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, who's currently taking charge, has said that she's going to take charge as an interim president, supposing that they want to keep the hopes up that they are going to get their leader back. But President Trump and his administration seems to be willing to either run Venezuela temporarily themselves, or to make sure that they will be able to gather a group of designees under this transition phase of Venezuela. And one person that does come to mind, which is somebody who the Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also said that could be possibly somebody that they are looking into, would be Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado, right? So Machado is out now, given that Trump administration does not think they have enough confidence in her. But Edmundo Gonzalez, probably, this is referring back to the 2024 elections. That remains a possibility that they might want, again, a big question mark, because how many of the loyalists still remain in Venezuela, we do not know. The third option, which probably US would not want, but those people are still very much powerful, is the Chavista military in Venezuela. So it remains to be seen that clearly Venezuela is undergoing a political crisis. They know internally they are, externally, even regionally, it is now a matter of concern. We heard voices of concern from Chile. We've heard voices of concern from Colombia, basically stating that they are expecting some sort of an exodus of population if this sort of a political unrest and political uncertainty, if it prolongs, that is going to be ultimately, for the neighboring countries to manage, if there is a migrant crisis.
And Donald Trump, along with Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, said that no one else apart from the United States could pull off an operation like this. Do you think operations like this set a precedent for treating state-aligned criminal networks as national security threats rather than purely law enforcement targets?
I mean, see, on one hand, they have demonstrated their capabilities. They have demonstrated that when US talks of deterrence, it means it. I mean, that's what probably I interpret the Trump administration wanted to signal. But in terms of setting a precedent, I mean, on the one hand, it is surprising that this administration did undertake this operation. But on the other hand, it seems less surprising because, when it's about rule-based international order, when we are talking about, international law, when exactly has United States or any such regional hegemon or global hegemon, when exactly have they upheld a rule-based international order unless it is on their own terms? So for the fact that they were able to blur the lines between law enforcement and include the military in it, it needed a lot of political backing. It needed a lot of them being convinced of this as an operation that was necessary. It needed a lot of legal frameworks as well. And again, this is not very clear, but at some point in 2025, and this was one of those league notes that came out of United States, it became very clear that they were starting to declare a lot of these narco traffickers or these organizations as terrorists. And once an organization is declared an international terrorist, in the US rule book, US can engage its military to dismantle those. And we've seen these operations earlier in the Middle East. We've seen them happening against Al-Qaeda. So, if US were to think that it is all right for a regional or in case of Latin America, of course, it's the strategic backyard of United States. So if it feels that it has enough capabilities and intent and the right to operate in its strategic backyard for what it feels is US security, because primarily President Trump and his administration is speaking to the US audience. So if they feel they are doing it for US security, it does in a way set a very dangerous precedent, not saying that other countries were not already doing it. We've seen in the past the kind of conflicts, let's say China is engaged in South China Sea or Russia is engaged in Ukraine. They do not need US to set the precedent for anything. But what it does do is that it does set a dangerous example of, a state with enough capabilities, a state which is empowered enough and feels that they speak for the regional security while prioritizing their national security, they can engage in this kind of an operation with such high stakes, not just for regional security, not just for regional stability, but also for, things like non-state actors, narco traffickers, and they can engage military and law enforcement and blur the lines. This is definitely going to, in some way, we might not see it immediately, but there are going to be ripple effects, and we will see them in the coming months as to, and then again, the third aspect of this is how do the other players respond. So we are seeing again a varied kind of responses from the other regional players, right? On one hand, you have countries like Israel who are probably going to support the United States. On the other hand, you will have US partners and US allies, in Europe, who might express concern, but who are probably not going to go entirely against the United States in terms of this operation. And then you'll have countries in Latin America, or we might see other countries like China and Russia who might raise voices of concern. And all of this, I'm speaking in the backdrop of organizations or frameworks, international institutions like United Nations that have completely failed once again to deter or to uphold what we think of as international law, or being able to uphold the sovereignty of any nation, because clearly here looks like might is right. So, but
Yes.
to answer your question, in short, it does feel like this is going to be, it might not be the only thing setting a precedent. We've seen enough conflicts going on, but this might definitely be one of those instances that will continue to get quoted again and again if there were to be another
Yes.
violation of yet another nation's sovereignty.
Yes, Dr. Asta Chadha, thank you very much for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for taking the time. Well, that is all that we have time for on this episode of Deep Dive. Stay tuned on NewsX for more international updates. Thank you.